You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Weston Williams, joined this week by Oliver Camacho and Matt Cummings. All right, this week, on October 30th, opera's biggest competition crowned this year's winners in Riga, Latvia, and on October 31st, Classical Singer Forum replaced the face of the competition's creator with that of Harvey Weinstein, congratulating, quote, opera institutions who remain complicit with sexual predators. Yikes. Will you, our beloved and woke OBS listeners, now also be complicit for learning the results of Groperalia 2022? Plus, in the 2-minute drill, friend of the show Afton Battle is moving on from Fort Worth Opera and asks, what part of that do you not understand? Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Stitcher and Spotify. Click follow. On Apple Podcasts, hit the plus sign. Send us a voice memo or email us your hot takes at operaboxscore@gmail.com. You'll get an OBS beer coaster and an OBS lapel pin just for sharing your own hot take. And without further ado, Oliver Camacho, how are you this fine evening?
I'm good, and I have to congratulate, I guess you,
Me?
and yeah, and George for coming up with a good show last week for Halloween, which we're actually recording on Halloween today, but you're not going to hear this, listeners, until later on in the week. But friend of the show, Michael Rice, the original opera podcaster, thought it was one of our good shows.
Is that just because you and I weren't on it?
Yes, it was like a...
Matt, how are you doing? Are you feeling at all spooky this past week? I know you missed the spooktacular, so it can't have been too spooky.
Oh, I mean, I've just been crying my eyes out having missed the spooktacular. It's one of my favorite traditions.
Oh, so sad.
I was actually kind of worried that I was going to get abducted by zombies on Saturday night because I drove home from having dinner with my dad who was in town, and the park across the street from my apartment had this blanket of fog that truly looked like something out of a George Romero movie. So we're all lucky that I'm here tonight, frankly.
We are indeed, but unfortunately, I'm told by George that we have been unlucky in fantasy football this past week. He says, sad news, we played the Magic Fluties, who were in the 12th place going into our game, and one of the lowest scoring teams overall. However, Sunday was their day, and it was their highest scoring game of the season, and as best as I can tell, the most points scored by anyone in the league so far in the season as well. Sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail. Our record falls to 6-2.
Such words of wisdom from our fearless leader.
Sad. But
I think that's supposed to be our record falls to 6-2. I'm not sure, but
6 and 2, 6-2. I don't. 6'7" is what I am, so I don't understand any other numbers beyond that. So let's talk some opera.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
So as Weston previewed, we are going to be talking about that competition, which it just concluded yesterday as we record. And I confess to having watched as much of it as I could because I really enjoy watching it. A few weeks ago, we had Katie Lewick on, and the video of her singing Regnava nel Silenzio is still one of the most exciting videos. We also had Amanda Woodbury on a few years back, and her Ophelia's Mad Scene from Amelie is also a bop. And I mean, it's just an exciting competition. You meet singers who are just on the cusp of having big careers. And I have to say that they get it right a lot. They don't always get it right. But some of the singers who have placed in Groperalia really have gone on to become singers of note internationally and domestically. Matt, do you want to give us a tiny bit of history or sort of how Groperalia is set up?
I mean, to go off on what you were saying, almost every year, at least one, if not more, of the people who place have major careers. And the way that these people enter the competition is that It's singers who are aged from 18 to 20-ish until 32, who are, quote, ready for an international career in opera, whatever that means. And about 1,000 people submit applications every year, video recordings, to get picked to be the 40-ish people who will compete live in the competition. There are 3 rounds of the competition. After the first round, it gets cut down to 20. After the second round, it gets cut down to 10. And then the final 10 compete in this final round, which is the only round that is in that has an orchestra. That's an orchestral gala. It is decided by a jury, which is presided over by he who shall not be named.
Who must not be named.
Well, this year, in addition to him, we had Samuel Gelberg from Washington National Opera, Jonathan Friend of the Met, Tobias something or other from Berlin Staatsoper, David Lomelli from Santa Fe, formerly of Dallas Opera, the CEO of the Latvian Opera, Caroline something or other from Theater an der Wien.
Yeah, so, a panel of who's who in these elite opera managers, company directors, casting directors, and they are the jury who decides the winners, but there is also an audience prize that the audience votes on while the jury is making the decision of who shall place. And when we're talking about some notable winners, I mean, we're talking about, that includes some people who are at the very top of their fields. Like in 1993, one of the earliest years of the competition, Nina Stemma won this competition. Brian Asawa, the countertenor, won this competition. Eric Owens.
That was early in the idea of countertenors. That was in 1994.
Yeah.
But they got it right. I mean, like, he had a major career.
Right. And then a couple years later, Eric Owens got second place. A few years after that, the winner was Erwin Schrott, the former Mr. Netrebko, and Joyce DiDonato and Ludovic Tézier tying for second behind him, like Rolando Villazon. Some more recent names: Pretty Yende, Rachel Willis Sorensen, friend of the show, Lisa Davidson, Sonia Yoncheva, Angel Blue, Rosa Fayola, like a lot of people who go on to sing with great acclaim and like are very buzzed about singers and whose potential more often than not pays off.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that list, Eileen Perez, friend of the show, Janai Brugger, friend of the show, Anthony Roth Costanzo, friend of the show, Katie Lewick placed third, friend of the show. We already mentioned Amanda Woodbury. Rachel Willis Sorensen won in 2014, beating out Amanda Woodbury and countertenor John Holliday. Renee Barbera, Emily D'Angelo, incredible artist, who is one of my favorites right now, and friend of the show, Emily Pogareltz, placed third. So, so many of these singers have had careers or are enjoying careers right now that are careers to watch. And, maybe Operalia just, is picking people who already show lots of signs that they are going to be doing this stuff. And let's be real, the panel the judging panel are the people that get to make that decision about what type of career.
So they get to they get to really reinforce what they've already decided is a successful singer.
I mean, it's a very interesting competition in my mind because it's that whole, they are already like basically getting a career sort of, just as a prerequisite. I feel like a lot of competitions focus on like young singers who are kind of unheard of, and like these are younger singers generally speaking, but they're also, more established than I think your average competition. But I think it is. I think what makes it such a big predictor of success is the fact that it is so close to that sort of core of power and sort of like the old established management.
No,
you're
exactly right. There are, the competition that we think of the most in the U.S. as like the big competition is the Met competition. Right, but the Met competition essentially is like a young artist competition. It's not an established artist competition. And the Operalia singers are, in fact, on the young side, but most of them have already had engagements in opera houses that are not just like finishing their master's degree,
Yeah.
So there's one part of the mission that maybe, Matt, you could speak to this. They care about Zarzuela. I wonder why. What do you think about their, side mission to promote Zarzuela, and are they accomplishing that?
So the founder of this competition is the child of two zarzuela singers, and the two prizes in zarzuela that they give out every year, one for a male singer and one for a female singer, are named in honor of his parents. And so it is definitely very close to the mission of someone in particular to try to prop it up. And certainly there are notable singers who won the zarzuela prize and didn't end up placing in the competition. Ana Maria Martinez is one of them. In one of the earliest years, she was a zarzuela prize winner but did not place. And it gives kind of a second bite at the apple, because singers are eligible for multiple prizes. They're eligible to be awarded as many prizes as the jury decides that they should have. But I wouldn't say that it's necessarily translated into like an explosion of opera houses all over the world picking up this repertoire and running with it, even if theoretically it's supposed to create a pool of singers who understand it and are able to really, take it and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, singers from, let's say, Latvia are sort of, disadvantaged by...
Just a little bit. I mean, I do think that zarzuela is such an interesting art form because it is so regionally specific. It is odd almost to see it in something as wide-ranging and as, opera-centric as Operalia, but it is a lot of like crossover skills. I mean, you do have to be an operatic singer, at least to some degree, to be successfully singing these zarzuelas. I do admire, in one way, the centering of that sort of, that sort of voice and that sort of performance. It's just kind of strange to have both at the same time, and I am not versed enough on my zarzuelas to know how much these singers are actually going back and then doing zarzuelas. There might be some stats on that I'm just not aware of, but it's a weird sort of dual competition, and it's like, oh yeah, this is a thing we also do that doesn't really. I'm sure it matters very much to some very specific people, but I think most people who are watching Operalia are not interested in that part of the competition.
I think they are doing something a little bit more relevant recently by creating the Birgit Nilsson Prize, which acknowledges a singer, just one, doesn't matter which gender, a singer who has the potential to move into Wagnerian repertoire. And not many singers can, declare that before they turn 32. It's one of those things that kind of happens later in your career. But, Nina Stemma probably would have won the Wagnerian Prize. The Birgit Nilsson Prize, if that existed back in 1993 when she competed.
I was going to say, like, if you take zarzuela and compare it to a very similar genre like operetta, that gets done by opera houses. Like, it gets done a lot in Austria and Germany, but it gets done in opera houses all over the world. Whereas zarzuela has not really been able to break out of that kind of regional bubble of Spanish-speaking countries. And if the goal was to bring a higher level of recognition to it as an art form, I'm not sure that you can say that it's fully succeeded.
Yeah, especially when you have a competition like this where you're already talking about people who have some sort of career very close to these seats of power. It doesn't really come across as a let me introduce you to something cool kind of competition. It's this is what's going to happen, if you are
I'm
already
doing
in
this
the
to
circle.
Maximize my chances of possibly winning a prize.
Right.
Since
exactly.
the zarzuela part of the competition is optional also for singers to opt in or out of.
So if you were watching, like I was watching, that the adjudication takes an unusually long time. And while you're waiting, you get these fun interviews on the ground in Latvia or wherever the competition is happening. But then when it's time to announce the winners, they have this package that they play, this video package, while all the adjudicators are assembled on the stage, and I assume somebody's back there carving names into awards. They play
Chiseling frantically.
Yes, they play this movie. It's like a half hour long of like the creator of Operalia is so great. And you get testimonials from the likes of Sonia Yoncheva and Joyce DiDonato and Anthony Roth Costanzo And, people who, maybe not Sonia Yoncheva, but people who like we know sort of their brand. And we would think that besides being ambassadors for the art in general, they're also social justice warriors. So yeah, I totally misspoke by saying Sonia Yoncheva.
Yeah, really not her. She's been going to the mat to defend him for a while now.
But that always gives a slightly icky feeling. Right. And they were asked and they said yes, and they could have said no, but they said yes. So that's a choice. And then the backlash happens probably every year. This year, we have on the new Forum for Classical Singers, the administrator, Claudia Friedlander, saying, every time an opera industry professional expresses admiration and gratitude towards him, every time a young singer avails themselves of his largesse via this competition, it undermines the quality of our culture and the safety of our workplaces. So Claudia was specifically referring to New England Conservatory, who posted a picture of one of the winners, I believe is a alumnus of New England Conservatory. And that picture is posed with the creator of the competition. She made that post, and apparently New England Conservatory took it down after they saw like that there was going to be some stuff in the comments.
Yeah.
And Claudia responded by saying, way to avoid actually making a statement of any kind about your complicity with a known prolific sexual predator. And she reposted the original picture.
I mean, I think it really speaks to, because like we were saying, this is the competition where it's like the old established industry movers and shakers, are in charge of it, including the tenor who must not be named. And I mean, I definitely have some sympathy, because this is, in many ways, this feels like the competition, if there is such a thing in the opera world, that is too big to fail. Do you know what I mean? This is the big one, right? And it is so connected to him that you have this strong incentive to, like, even if about his, allegations and stuff, you are very strongly incentivized to be like, I am so close to the seat of power here. I don't want to like accidentally get blacklisted. I want to ride the coattails of these powerful people in our industry. Especially if you're one of the competitors, one of the younger singers who is, has a starting career, but like for them, winning Operalia or even like getting in the finals or the semifinals would be such a huge potential boost to their career. It is
not to mention to their bottom line for the year. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, you have so much like financial incentive to be like, well, let's try to look past all that and like look at the positive, for want of a better word, of like, because like this competition has elevated some important careers, and and I feel like it becomes very easy to sweep under the rug in the moment. Especially when you have, obviously he has not had really any career over here in the US for a while, but in Europe there's so much apologists for him that you have it's very hard to get past that when you are right there in the seat of power. It reminds me of like I think it was there was a, oh God, what was the movie? It was about the Nixon Watergate, that whole thing. And there's a scene where one of the characters is like decrying Nixon. He's like, oh, I can't stand him. I would tell him what for if I ever got the chance, and then he has the opportunity to meet him in the White House. And all he can do is hold out his hand and shake his hand, because it's just so intimidating to be in that seat of power. Right. It's a very strong psychological push, and it's a difficult situation too, because this is such a big competition. It feels like you can't just like get rid of the competition. I mean, maybe in a few years after he dies, they'll remove his name subtly from as much as they can. But, until then, what do you do? It's
but it feels like, in some ways, it feels like some really foreboding foreshadowing here, because the reactionary winds are blowing very, very strongly.
Right.
And there are not very many people whose whose consequences and whose accountability from the last couple of years have completely stuck. Like Harvey Weinstein is one of the few. James Levine is one of the few.
Right.
And to have this kind of a toehold for a tenor turned baritone who like is desperate
turned
conductor, right? Turned opera director, turned administrator, but who is desperate to stay relevant and to stay at the center of the industry, not just involved in the industry, but to stay like in the middle of the limelight. It sends a really bad message in terms of the priorities and in terms of what people are going to be willing to stand up for going forward now that they don't have the wind at their back quite so much in terms of speaking up about this sorts of things.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that our resident fully functioning rageaholic Ashley Hargrave isn't on the show today to give us her perspective as a woman in this industry. I'll say that I have been the victim of aggravation. Aggravation? Is that the word? I've been the victim of misconduct in my, has been or never has been career, and so I understand how this can feel and how it can make you doubt whether you have talent or doubt if you could have gotten further if you had been compliant, etc. But I also come from an age where it's like, yeah, just suck it up. Like, this is the business you chose. Like, and that's my issue. I'm of my generation where I just accept these things. I know that the younger generations are not going to stand for it. And I'm grateful to them for, making a stink and for hopefully causing positive change. But what are we going to do with this competition? And, how is the board going to, as you said, Weston, erase his name from this thing and all the ties that he created it, for God's sake,
Yeah.
He there's a whole section of the website that's just about him.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is going to become easier once he eventually, kicks the bucket. And things start to get quietly erased. I mean, I do feel like I don't see, at least in, sort of the English speaking world, I definitely don't see his name come up in association with Operalia nearly as often as he did before all the allegations came out. But that might just be me. That might just be the circle that I'm hanging out in. It is really something to consider. I mean, it is time to sort of like, start that process now, before we get, before we just like, I mean, it's not very proactive to just wait for someone to die, right? You need to be raising the stink. You need to think about the consequences of letting him still be a part of it. And because, because you're right, Oliver, like the younger generation is the one that's speaking up and like pushing back. But like, again, there's that incentive, especially for young singers to just, pose and like, and just be like, wow, this is the famous tenor baritone conductor that we've all heard so much about. And if I don't get this, if I don't publish this pro him picture on social media, that could mean the difference of, of a whole career for me, and I think it does create the incentive. It's not just a symptom of the way the opera industry has been poorly run in terms of sexual assault for forever. It is by having him still be there, it is keeping it and trying to implant that acceptance in the next generation. And I don't know if it will succeed to the extent it has in the past, but it is something that we need to try to eradicate while we can before it builds right back up again.
Well, this is an ongoing topic, and as long as Operalia is around, we're going to have to think about these things and reckon with it. And we really would love to hear from you, our listeners, on what your take is and what we should do and how we should talk about this competition and talk about the people who win it and who are necessarily obliged to be grateful to the competition, which in turn makes them grateful to the competition's creator.
Well, while we figure out how to reckon with this whole situation, let's try something a little easier and reckon with the 2-minute drill.
This just in. the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Congratulations to the winners of the 2022 Operalia competition. Big winner is soprano Serena Sáenz Molinero of Spain, who won the Zarzuela Prize for her gender, who won second place in opera, and won the Birgit Nilsson Prize. Congratulations to first prize male for opera, Anthony Leon, a tenor from the US, and another big winner, Armenian soprano Juliana Grigorian, who also took away the audience prize for her gender. Juliana Grigorian won her opera competition with the Song to the Moon from Rusalka, and Anthony Leon by singing Je crois entendre from Bizet's The Pearl Fishers.
While not every singer in the Operalia competition made it past the first round, Russian baritone Vasily Sokolov was disqualified before he even had a chance to sing. Officials cited his service in the song and dance ensemble of the Russian army as the reason for his disqualification.
Afton Battle, one of the few black women to ever run a U.S. opera company, is resigning from Fort Worth Opera, becoming the second consecutive general director in a row to resign after 3 seasons or less. A self-professed artist activist, Battle had previously expressed frustrations over running the company as a black woman in a conservative state. Battle took to social media to say, "I am starting a new chapter in my career that will be announced soon."
La Scala has received a letter from a number of Ukrainian Italian citizens asking the company to rethink the use of Russian operas for their upcoming season. The letter claims that opening the season with Boris Godunov gives grist to Russian propaganda mills to gin up support for Putin's war.
Decca Classics has announced a new album entitled Jesse Norman, The Unreleased Masters, which will showcase never-before-heard recordings by the legendary soprano. The set includes a performance of Tristan und Isolde, where she performed the roles of both Isolde and Brangäne, Wagner and Strauss song cycles, and a live recording of cantatas by Haydn, Berlioz, and Britten.
In non-Operalia contest news, Mexican baritone Carlos Arambula has won the Radio Philharmonia singing contest, while Mexican tenor Osvaldo Martinez took home the Dempsey Rivera Special Award. Meanwhile, French Cypriot soprano Sarah Aristidou has received the Belmont Prize for Contemporary Music.
In trade news, the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées has announced that Baptiste Charouin, the company's current director of production, will succeed Michel Frank in 2025. Charouin notably participated in the creation of the Chamber Philharmonic, founded the ensemble Les Dissonances, and has previously worked with Palazzetto Bruzzane. But really, I'm telling you all of this because after looking at his headshot, I think I'm moving to France.
In not being traded news, Opera Theatre of St. Louis has announced the renewal of general director and friend of the show Andrew Jorgensen's contract for an additional 5-year term, taking his total tenure to 10 years.
On the disabled list, the Wiener Staatsoper has announced a cast change for its production of Ariadne auf Naxos. The company said that Kate Lindsay will sing the role of the composer, replacing Christina Bach for performances this November.
Congratulations to soprano Laura Wilde, who replaced Nicole Carr as Ellen Orford in Peter Grimes, making her Metropolitan Opera debut. Carr will return for performances in November.
Exit stage right, Mariana Nicolescu has died at the age of 73. In 1978, Nicolescu made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera and went on to perform at many of the leading theaters around the world, including La Scala, the Salzburg Festival, and the Rossini Opera Festival.
Metropolitan Opera stagehand Joseph Ancona has died at the age of 20. The young crew member was involved in an accident in the New York City subway last month. $11,000 has already been raised to help cover funeral expenses through GoFundMe.
And on this day, October 31st, in 1724, George Friedrich Handel's opera Tamerlano premiered at the King's Theatre in the Haymarket. In 1788, Luigi Cherubini's La Molinarella premiered in Paris. In 1833, Alexandre Borodin was born. 1866 saw the first performance of Jacques Offenbach's operetta La Vie Parisienne, and just 8 years later, his Madame l'Archiduc premiered on this day in Paris. In 1891, Pietro Mascagni's L'Amico Fritz premiered in Rome. In 1906, Jules Massenet's Ariane premiered in Paris. And on this day, October 31st, in 1949, Mark Blitzstein's Regina opened in New York City.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
You just heard mezzo-soprano Vivica Janot singing the aria A dispetto d'un volto ingrato from Handel's Tamerlano.
A bop.
A bop indeed. And if you watch the video, you can see that idiosyncratic coloratura technique that we all love so much.
Love it so much. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. I forget what the call to action is, but you're listening right now. Just go ahead and do it. It'll just take you a second. You hit, was it plus?
On Apple Podcasts, it is.
Yeah.
And favorite or follow on Stitcher and Spotify.
This is why we give George the job to do the call to action. Yes, it's one of those days. Obviously, you listeners will not hear it. This will be a flawless performance for you guys. But let me tell you, that 2-minute drill had a lot of bloopers.
More like the 22-minute drill.
Speaking of bloopers, I'm very interested to hear what happened at Fort Worth Opera that caused Afton Battle to quit so suddenly. I think it'd be great to get her on the show and ask her about it if she's able to speak about it.
It does feel abrupt, and she is still amplifying her initiatives, and things are still happening that she started over there. She's not burning it all down, so but her leaving definitely feels spicy, to say the least.
Yeah, it does.
Well, these board members, from some of the quotes in this article, sound like real pieces of work about how no one hired her to be an activist. Like, that was when she's very open about it, and you give her the job, then yes, you kind of did. Frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very clear who Afton Battle is. She's an activist. She has a very strong sense of justice. She is exactly the kind of person that we need to be running more companies, especially at this time when we're finally starting to reckon with, some of opera's racist past, some of, the opera's sexist past. It's so frustrating to see. Again, I'm purely speculating. I don't know why she is leaving, but she has expressed frustration before in the conservative nature of this specific of opera in this region. And
you know what? It just means that these opponents did not listen to her interview that she gave us right when she was
yeah,
named.
they really
I
didn't.
mean, she said it right then and there who she was, and she has lived up to it. So
yeah, it's just very interesting to me. I imagine more will come out. Obviously, she's not trying to burn any bridges as far as we can tell. So I don't know how salacious it might be, but I think it's I think it'd be great to get her on the show again and maybe hear what she has to say, because that's, obviously something that I think maybe the trustees were not doing.
So we don't talk about recordings enough on this show, but
really?
Yeah. No, I mean, we could talk about them a lot more, and it's going to be a great year. We're going to get a Diana Damrau Christmas album, which you already teased.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's
what's our advent calendar at?
There is a new Theodora with Lizette Oropeza as Theodora and Joyce DiDonato as Irene. And then today, it felt like Christmas in October, or Christmas on Halloween. A new Spooky. Jesse Norman CD?
I know.
Truly something that I never thought would ever happen again, for obvious reasons.
Well, yeah. Well, I will say, this is there is a lot of a lot of material out there for a lot of these, classic singers who've been around for a long time. There, a lot of these big recording companies don't even know what they have.
That's true.
On tape. It's so fascinating to me to hear about restorations and someone, especially when you have companies who are so busy not thinking about the classical music part of their division of.
I mean, this is Decca. If there's one of the three that's still
True.
kind of alive.
They're the most aware of what they have in their archives, perhaps. But like, there's still it's very easy to like lose things. I mean, Oliver and I both work at a radio station, and it's very easy to just find like a reel-to-reel tape that's just like this gem of an interview from 1965 that has not been heard since 1965. And it's really, really exciting. And I'm like, oh wow, new Jesse Norman content is what I'm about, and they probably have more.
Well, there's this teaser that I don't quite understand, that there's a Tristan ut Isolde where she sings Isolde and Brangena. Is that like when Grace Bumbry sang Aida and Amneris on the same recording?
Or when
with herself?
Birgit Nilsson sang both Venus and Elizabeth in her Tannhäuser recording. But
I don't know
they
exactly
don't have to
what
do
that
duets.
means. Yeah.
I do think it's really important that this is being done with the support of her family and estate, because a lot of times when I hear about these like archival recordings being released, I get concerned that someone is being exploited as a kind of cash grab. But it seems so far like this is all above board, and it's just getting these released out so the public can hear them and to do honor to her work, which even a artist as prolifically recorded as Jesse Norman, like there's more out there that people should be able to hear, because it's pretty much all good.
And like Decca, like also like, not to get too much like a recording nerd in here, but Decca has some really good tapes on hand. They always have very like high fidelity reel to reel recordings, from that sort of era. I'm assuming this is sort of the 60s, 70s era.
No, this would have been recorded in the 80s or the 90s.
80s or 90s?
Yeah, maybe even the aughts, yeah.
Oh, but then
that's
maybe
when
not
it was recorded in 98, it says.
Okay.
Oh, 98. Okay.
The Tristan was from 98, and the song cycles are from 89 to 92-ish, and the cantatas from 94. So
still, they should be pretty solidly done. Even the live stuff should be really exciting.
So you're saying that stuff from the 60s and 70s sounds better than stuff from the 80s and the 90s?
I mean, honestly, yeah. I mean, obviously it's all subjective, but I've you talk about, it's part of their marketing, so grain of salt here, but the Decca sound, it really is a thing. If you, I had a whole phase, when I was in, high school where I like, got really sick of like the Deutsche Grammophon mixing, and I had like a straight year where I would only listen to Decca recordings.
Yeah, and correct me
from that era.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Weston, but like Decca is known specifically as being the best voice for best mixing for vocal classical music.
Yeah, I would say so. If you're talking about like the golden era of recordings, I would say so. They have a lot of depth of sound.
I mean, the Schulte Ring is on Decca.
Yeah,
a lot of the Joan Sutherland, Richard Bonning recordings were on Decca.
Their recordings tend to age extremely, extremely well, and that's why I'm so excited.
I think that's a topic for a show where you show the audience. I'm serious. You show the audience, because when it's compressed to MP3 for a podcast, I'm sure they won't tell the difference, but you should explain what you mean by that, because I mean, I sort of get where you're coming from, but I think that's a lot for people, and like, Matt and I will nerd out about like vocal technique and, ornaments
who
like
did
that.
What trill, who interpolated which E flat where, and whose was the best.
I do want to circle back to Operalia and just congratulate Duke Kim, who again I saw sing Romeo in Milwaukee just earlier this month. And he did such a great job singing Lenski's aria. There was a Korean bass baritone. His name is Yong-won Han, who sang that Banquo aria from Macbeth. I forget what it's called.
Principita something.
Yeah, but it's just like, my son, look out, whatever. It's a great aria.
Prends à toi. That one.
Yeah.
That great aria, my son, look out.
But it was like, this guy has tone for days. Like, I thought he was gonna win just because his tone was so impressive, and it even came through on my crappy little JBL speaker. It just suddenly like just shook my apartment.
It's like that Decca sound.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment so much on the winners. I don't know them, and they were fine. And maybe I'm a little bit prejudiced because I really do adore Duke Kim, but who knows? who the heck knows?
That's some incisive commentary that you come to Opera Box Score for.
Aren't you friends with Emily?
I am friends with Emily Sierra. We both worked together briefly at Chicago Opera Theater several years ago now. Maybe I can grab her and get her on the show one of these days.
She sang Parto Parto, which I think is a really hard aria to compete with. I think it's impressive to a very, very small segment of the audience. I love that aria. I know.
Theoretically, you would think that a jury of all of the luminaries in the opera world would be among, but there's no accounting for taste.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of the winners of Operalia, not to get too much into the problematic aspects of it again, but like I do think a lot of the winners tend to feel more like political decisions than
which is hardly a unique problem to Operalia.
Yeah, definitely not. Honestly, I don't even mind that too much. Personally, as like a viewer of a competition, because I usually just kind of expect that what I hear and what they hear is going to be different, and it's going to be colored by different things. And I might even feel like someone was robbed sometimes. But, when it comes right down to it, I'm like, it's mostly about coming together and like creating music in a really unique competitive atmosphere that's very sports-like, which is very on brand for us. And some people don't like that and some people do,
Wait a second. I have to do a Jamie Barton here and apologize. I misstated the name of the bass who was really impressive.
Oliver, no.
The bass who I thought was really impressive, who I thought was going to win, but got an encouragement award instead, was In-Ho Zhang. He sang the Banco aria. There's actually a lot of Koreans this year, so I just got the names mixed up, and I didn't put the name to the face, and I'm conflating all the Koreans. Thank goodness Duke Kim's name was very distinct for me.
Oliver is canceled.
I'm canceled.
All right. Well, now that Oliver's been canceled, I think it's time to end the show. Hopefully not permanently. We'll see what the audience reaction is to this when it goes out and Oliver is raked through the mud. But let's move on to Good Call, Bad Call.
Good Call, Bad Call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. It's how we end every single show, even this one. Oliver Camacho, what do you have for me?
Well, congrats to friends of the show, Janai Brugger and Matthew Polenzani, for pulling their weight in what was clearly the Sandra Rabinovsky show last week. They were both so good and so watchable and sang so beautifully. Even though once Sandra Rabinovsky came on stage, you could not hear anybody else in last week's Medea from the Met. And I also want to shout out friend of the show, Katie Lewick, who posted this Facebook video of her practicing the coloratura jag that she's going to sing very soon at Lyric Opera of Chicago. Love. Thank you, Katie, for sharing that.
Oh my gosh, she sounds amazing.
Matt Cummings.
Check out our show notes to find a pretty awesome profile of soprano Latonia Moore from NPR. It talks about her how she got into opera from her background as a jazz and gospel singer, and she just comes across as like a very normal, cool person, and we always like to see normal person representation in the arts. So, rock on.
Normal person representation is the way to go forward. Yeah, so true. I have a good call. This is from George. It looks like there's a Guardian article. Let me click on it. Oh, it's about Gilbert and Sullivan. Oh, no. It says, dismiss their
Bad
works
talks.
at your peril. Strip the barnacles off stale tradition, off the Victorian duo's light operettas, and their seditious glory still shines. Yeah, George, I'll just click X on that one. All right, that's it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio Show about opera. Our announcer is Norm Waddell. He's at normwaddell.com. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Stitcher and Spotify. Click follow. On Apple Podcasts, hit that plus sign. Send us a voice memo or email us your hot takes at operaboxscore@gmail.com. You'll get an OBS beer coaster and an OBS lapel pin just for sharing your own hot take and canceling Oliver Camacho. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio editor is me, Weston Williams. For your co-host, Matt Cummings, I'm Weston once again, asking you to continue the conversation about opera while you try not to mention the name of a certain famous tenor who is not Pavarotti and he's not Carreras. We're back with an all-new show next week when we go inside the huddle with the team behind Gods of the Games, the football opera that opened last month at Grange Park Opera. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more of the Decca Sound. Join us.